I thought before, I apologize for Khalid Ahmed. I think he may have got lost. I know he, at least I spoke to him last night, and I know he is planning to come. So I will not call on him to speak at the beginning, but towards the end. I just wanted to make just a few comments on the subject of peacemaking and peace building. In 1992, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros-Boutros-Ghali, was invited to make a presentation to the Security Council on the various methods that the UN had developed or was developing to deal with conflict and to try to find a peaceful solution. And he talked about things like peacemaking, peacekeeping, conflict prevention. But he added a new term that really hadn't been part of the UN lexicon until then, and that was peace building. And basically he was focusing on what the international community could do to help restore long-term peace after a peace agreement had been reached. In other words, what happened after 2005 in the case of the agreement dealing with Sudan and South Sudan. And when looking at over the peace-building activities over the last 20 years or so, I think you can easily identify at least 4 components to the process. First is what's called security sector reform. And that not only involves the idea of demobilizing, demilitarizing old soldiers and reintegrating them into society, so-called DDR programs. But it also involves the establishment of or the redevelopment of a police force. And more importantly, what we were discussing yesterday, the infrastructure of a legal system. Courts, judges, lawyers, and the rule of law more generally, I think is part of the overall notion of security sector reform. The second is political arrangements of different sorts. And here we're talking about setting up new, because often what we're dealing with are failed states whose institutions have no longer been able to serve their functions. And so creating new institutions that are both effective and legitimate. I think that's an important ingredient. And one element, and again it was mentioned in the context of Kenya, I think a very important part of that process is the drafting of a new constitution. And it's not just the constitution itself, it's the process by which that constitution is drafted. So when you're thinking about it, it will take place over a number of years, and consulting with a wide range of people to ensure inclusiveness in that process. The third component is economic development, and I think as Buri Hamza was talking about El-Shabaab, the need for jobs. People are going to be demobilized from serving in militias or the government forces. They have to find some meaningful employment, or otherwise they'll become quickly, in the case of Somalia, of course, swept up by Al-Shabaab. So jobs, economic development is the third component. The fourth and last one is justice and reconciliation. In some ways, I like to think of those two terms as perhaps separate, because I think sometimes in the pursuit of justice, one can undermine reconciliation. But they're usually combined together, and probably then the question is trying to do them in a sequential order that is effective. And that brings up the final point that I would make, and that is that sequencing. What do you deal with first? You have to establish law and order before you can set up new institutions, before economic development can take place. And there are those who will focus in that way on one of these components to the exclusion of others. I think all of them are so interconnected that it's very hard to proceed along one line without addressing the others, because a failure to address the others will undermine your efforts, whether it's building security. But the one, I guess, two general comments that I think come out of certainly my reflection on peace building is that it's a process unlike Boutros Boutros-Ghali's presentation, which really said it's an international activity. I think peace building is a local activity. The international community can facilitate, assist that process. But if it's being forced from the top down, I think it's more than likely to fail in the long run. It really should be bottom up. And often that means not even the new local government, but the NGO community, the civil community itself, and representatives from that. I guess the last comment I would make is that, and I think representatives or leaders of Western countries that are often offering assistance, they don't want to get into a long-term project. They don't want to, they want to get in and out. In other words, they're looking for quick fixes. And one measurement of success is, can you hold an election, and would that election hold without being challenged by those who have lost? But I think the real lesson is that there are no quick fixes. Peace building takes, Jean-Paul Lederach said, peace building takes generations to achieve, and I think that's true. Generations. How can people that have been shooting each other and killing each other's family members sit down and call it peace? It's very difficult to achieve. So I think that's clearly a message when looking for solutions.